Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be going into a bit more detail about all the books I read in February. You may or may not be aware that I've decided to split my end of the month wrap up, so I should already have posted my stats wrap up so you can find a bit more about the facts and figures of what I read in February. I will link that for you in the description box. And in this video I'm actually going to talk about the books. This is so that my wrap ups don't get to a crazy long length. This one hopefully won't be. I did read 11 books in February, but I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about them. And I think moving forward I'm probably going to break it down and maybe do a mid-month wrap up, or do a recent reads type thing where every 5 books or so I'll talk about those books, rather than leaving all to the end of the month and having really long videos where I don't go into as much detail as I'd like about the books. But for today I'm gonna talk specifically about all the books I read in February. All these books I rated 4 or 5 stars though, so I had a really strong reading month and they were all books that I really enjoyed. In my previous wrap-ups I usually go through the books in order from least favourite to most favourite, but because I'm changing up the format of how I do them, I'm just going to go through in the order that I read them for this month. And I think because I'm planning to do maybe a mid-month wrap-up or a recent reads moving forward, I'm going to probably stick to going through the books in the order I read them from now on. Right, so the first book that I finished in February was Pyro Investigates by Agatha Christie. This, I believe, is the 3rd book in the Poirot series. Poirot being probably Agatha Christie's most famous detective and the one she wrote the most about. This is a collection of short stories, short mysteries that Poirot solves. Again, features Hastings as the narrator, and it is really fun to see how Hastings gets more and more frustrated with Poirot as the book goes along, because Poirot always gets it right and Hastings rarely does. So this was a really enjoyable collection for me. I love Poirot as a character and I found this a really enjoyable set of short stories about him, and I'm looking forward to moving through the series a bit more. Just really exciting to know that I've still got loads of Agatha Christie to enjoy for the first time. The thing that got me switched on to reading Agatha Christie more is actually since being on BookTube, and I discovered Mara from Books Like Quo, who is a massive Agatha Christie fan. And actually the other day I was watching her rank all of the Agatha Christie books she'd read, and it made me realise I've got so many still to come and to enjoy. I can't remember specifics about many of these stories, to be fair, but I do remember enjoying them. Oh yeah, the one about the kidnapped Prime Minister I thought was very clever. There were quite a few in there that I really did enjoy. I prefer her novels to her short stories because I sometimes find short stories are just getting going and then they end, and that can be a bit frustrating. So I do generally prefer her novels, but these are really fun and really well written. The next book that I read, I finally got around to reading The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I've been meaning to read this for such a long time and was a little bit put off when I discovered exactly how hyped it was, particularly when her latest book came out and everyone was raving about it. And that conversely made me not want to read it, but then a number of people said that actually it's quite a atmospheric book and it's quite a wintry read. I was just looking for something a bit fantastical to get me out of a bit of a reading slump, and so I picked this one up. I gave this 4 stars. By the end of it I really loved it, but it took me a really long time to get into it, and that's because it is written in 3rd person present tense. Mostly written in 3rd person present tense, I should say, which is not a format that I generally enjoy because I do find it tends to distance me from what I'm reading, but actually for this book it did work and she did it very well, and once I got used to that I really got into it. There was the occasional chapter written in 2nd person, which I found quite a nice touch because that really did help to draw you into the novel, into the atmosphere of the book. I really loved the creativity of all the different scenarios, the different acts, the different rooms, the different events that existed and related to the circus, and how the multiple threads of the storyline are all wove together by the end. I thought the characters were brilliant. There were some really beautiful moments, some really heartbreaking moments, and I thoroughly enjoyed this. So I will be picking up her newest book, The Starless Sea, at some point, but I'll probably wait until I find it in a charity shop like I did this one. This one I probably will eventually buy a nicer copy because this is a really bashed copy that I got really cheap in a charity shop. So because I enjoyed it and I want to reread it, I will probably treat myself at some point to a much nicer copy of it. Next, this was my read around the world book actually for January, which I didn't managed to finish in January. This is a collection of plays by Federico Garcia Lorca, who was a Spanish playwright who died during the Spanish Civil War. No one knows entirely what happened to him. He was captured by the fascists and shot, and his body was never found. But he was quite famously a gay man in a time that was quite conservative. We studied one of these plays, Yerma, for my drama A-level, and I'd really enjoyed it, and I'd never got around to reading the other two. We did actually see another of his plays performed around the same time as well, so I've been meaning to go back and read these other two plays, which were Blood Wedding and Donna Rosita the Spinster, and I reread Yerma as well, and I remembered some details about it. What I really like about Lorca is he has a real understanding of women, which is quite rare for male writers. The characters he creates, I mean, there's so much life in these books and so much tragedy. Blood Wedding is about a young woman who, on the eve of her wedding to a local farmer, her first love appears and he married someone else. They decide to run away together and it ends quite tragically. Donna Rosita the Spinster just broke my heart. It was so beautiful and so tragic. Donna Rosita is in love with a young man who has proposed to her and promised to marry her, but then he has to go and deal with his family's estates in South America, and he's gone for a really long time, and she is waiting for him to come back for her. And then Yerma is about another young woman who she is seeing all of her friends get married and have babies, and she has not had a baby, and she feels like she is incomplete until she has that child. He explores these themes of tragedy, of love and loss so beautifully. I would really love to see these plays performed and see how they're brought to life, because his stage directions are quite sparse. Not many of the characters are actually named, which is also quite an interesting technique that he uses, and I do want to read more of his works as well, so I will at some point try and find some more collections of his plays. The next book I read was The Life and Work of a Priest by John Pritchard. I talked about this a little bit in my stats wrap-up because this was technically my least favourite book of the month, although I gave all the books 4 or 5 stars, so it was still a really good book. This I read for my theology book club, and it is what it says. It's about the life and work of a priest. What does it mean to be a priest in the Church of England? There was some really good stuff in here, and some bits of it I really enjoyed. I think it was just the tone at times that put me off. It came across as a bit patronising in places, and it was just a very quick overview of a lot of things, so there were some places that I was a bit frustrated that it didn't go deeper into those issues, but overall it was really good. We had a really good discussion about it at the book club as well. Right, the next book I read was a library book which I have now returned, which was Archenemies by Marissa and Meyer, and this is the second book in the Renegade series. I gave this book 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. I thought the way it developed all the themes of the first book was just brilliant. I loved the relationships between the characters and how those play out and develop. So the concept of renegades is that in a sort of dystopian future society, we've been through the age of anarchy where, sorry, that's my neighbour's baby crying. There's been an uprising of supervillains who have overthrown the government, and they were called the anarchists. After a certain period of time of anarchy, of wreck and ruin, the renegades, who are superheroes, have arisen and tried to restore order. So in the first book, Nova, who is the niece of Ace Anarchy, who was the lead anarchist, in an effort to try and undermine and bring down the renegades, has infiltrated the renegades and is pretending to be a superhero. She joins a team of Adrian, who is the son of the 2 leading renegades, and so she is now leading this double life of trying to prove her worth as a renegade but also try and find ways to undermine what they're doing. The plot just develops so much into the second book. The characters have grown and developed so much as well. I just really enjoy the moral greyness of it, because there is lots that the renegades do that is not good and not heroic, and there's lots that the anarchists do that you can understand why they've done it, and it just raises really interesting questions about how do you define what is a hero and what is a villain. Is it by their actions specifically or by the results of their actions? Does sometimes the ends justify the means? And it's really a very interesting take on that concept of superheroes. And the third book has recently come out, and I'm waiting for my library to get it. At the moment they've got copies on order, so hopefully I'll be able to read that soon. These are books that I probably will buy my own copies of eventually. I'm just trying to limit how many books I buy at the moment. I'm really looking forward to continuing to finishing off that series. I've had mixed things about the final book, which is called Supernova, so I'm interested to see what I think. The next book that I finished was also a library book. This was The Night of Cake and Puppets by Laini Taylor. This was a very fun and very quick, very short read. I gave it 4 stars. It's a novella related to the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy. I think it's actually set between books 1 and 2. Karou is the central character in the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy, and it's about her friend, her college friend, and how she and her love interest meet. And it was just really charming, really, really charming, really beautiful. It was illustrated as well, and it was just really lovely and just a really nice light thing to read that I really needed at the time I read it. So I very much enjoyed that one. Only took me a couple of days to get through it. And now I'm really keen to finish off the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy. I've just got one more book to read in that, so I'm going to be trying to get to that one quite soon. The next book I finished was Spark Joy by Marie Kondo. So I picked this up, you may remember, just before the end of last year, so I started reading this right at the end of December, and I was just reading a little bit every day, and actually most of it I really enjoyed. I am in a process of trying to declutter. It's taken me a while because when I wasn't very well it was very difficult to actually do that, to figure out what was sparking joy accurately, but that is something that's going to be ongoing for me for the next couple of months because there's a very real possibility that I might be moving house at the end of the summer. I don't know for certain yet, but in the interest of having less clutter, this is going to be very helpful, and so I'm going to be keeping it for reference. I didn't agree with the stuff she said about books because she basically said don't keep any books that you haven't read, which is like, Marie love, you're clearly not a reader. That's the whole point of having books that you haven't read. It's like, it's my collection, it's what I love. I am trying to be a bit more ruthless about not keeping books that I probably will never read and not keeping books that I won't reread, but in a lot of other ways I found this book really helpful to help me understand what is good to keep and what isn't, and before I buy stuff I think, do I need this? Is it better to buy something that's completely functional or something that is I'm going to get more use out of because I enjoy it more, that sort of thing. So I really do recommend it, particularly if you're a hoarder like I am. If you have a tendency to be quite untidy like I do, I think this book is going to be actually really valuable to me moving forward, but yeah, don't necessarily listen to what she says about book. Next I read Ghochar by Vivek Shanbhag. This was my buddy read for Valentine's Buddy Reads Roulette, so I read this with Hannah from Handpick Blog. I will link her channel down below. It was her suggestion. It was a book that she was planning to read in February anyway, and it was one that I managed to get from my library, and I'm so glad she suggested it because I really loved this book. It was only very short, it's just over 100 pages, but the amount of intensity and character building and just so much in such a short book. So this was a story about an Indian family and all their interactions. The son of the family has recently got married and brought his wife to live with his family. His family basically all live off the profits of his uncle's very successful company, so he doesn't ever have to work. He has a nominal position at the company, but he doesn't actually do anything to earn the money because when he did used to turn up at the factory he basically got in the way and was useless. It's about how his wife coming to join the family upsets the family dynamic, and there's a little bit of like backstory about the situation that he and his sister grew up in and how that's changed, and his sister's relationships and how they worked out, and his uncle's relationships and how the family relate to that. And there was just so much in there in such a short book, and it left me with a lot of questions, but in a good way. Sometimes it's really powerful to have a book that has no clear resolution. You don't know what's happened at the end. And I just really, really, really love this book. So I really do highly recommend it, particularly if you want to try and widen your reading horizons. This was just a great book. I gave it 5 stars, and it was probably one of my favourite books of the month. It was a very close thing between that and my actual favourite book of the month, which I'll get to later. So I read that book in one day. The next book I also read in one day. This was a reread for me. This was Winnie the Pooh by A A Milne. I read this around the time I returned to work, when I wanted just a little bit of a boost, a little bit of an uplift. Just sometimes you just need to go back to childhood favourites, and it's something very comforting about that. So I think most people know what Winnie the Pooh is about. It's about Christopher Robin and his collection of soft toy slash friends. They're stories A A Milne wrote for his son, and it was just really lovely the way the characters interact in this book. There's been quite a lot written recently about whether these characters actually represent different mental illnesses, and as someone who suffers a lot from anxiety, I can really see the similarities between myself and Piglet. I'm just gonna leave it there, really. But I'd forgotten how charming these stories were, and it was really lovely to reread them. The next book I finished was The Curse of the Kings by Victoria Holt. This was one of my book death row books, and I really loved this. I gave this 4 stars. It's one of my favourite books actually that I've ever read from my book death row, so I'm really pleased that I got around to it, that I actually did pick it up. I have a couple more Victoria Holt books to get to as well, so I'm really keen because of how much I like this. What I didn't know is Victoria Holt is actually a pen name, and the same author wrote under a number of different pen names. I can't remember her actual name off the top of my head, but she had 5 or 6 different pen names, and she wrote different genres for each pen name. So this Victoria Holt is like her gothic romance name, and she wrote under a number of other different pen names as well. This was about archaeology. It's set, I believe, sort of around the turn of the 20th century, so sort of late 1800s, early 1900s, but it's hard to pin it down to an exact date. It kind of implies that Victoria's still queen, so I'd say probably late 19th century. The main character has always had a fascination with archaeology, and when she is in her late teens she meets the son of a famous archaeologist who is also going into the field of archaeology, and she basically falls madly in love with him, but thinks she'll never return her affections because she is essentially the daughter of no one. She lives at the vicarage and is thought to be some sort of relation to the family of the vicar, but no one really knows. When she grows up, actually, surprisingly, she finds that he wants to marry her. She finds out who her parents are. He is involved in this archaeological dig, which seems to be cursed because people involved with the dig, a number of people involved with the dig, have died under mysterious circumstances. So she's really keen to go out there and find out what's happening. It's quite a mild thriller, like there is some tension, some suspense, and some elements of distrust, and there's some intrigue about the housekeeper, and there's just a lot going on in this book. Some of it did feel quite dated, I'm not gonna lie, but for me that was just overridden by how much I enjoyed reading it. It was just so silly in places and exciting and fun, and I really enjoyed this. So really happy to have some more Victoria Holt to get stuck into at some point. And we are nearly there. So one more book. The last book that I read in February was probably my favourite book, which was The Next Together by Lauren James. If you saw my February stats, this is a book I named as my favourite book that I read in February. So I'm not going to talk about it too much now because I talked about it quite a lot in that video, but basically the premise is the 2 central characters, Matthew and Catherine, have lived across multiple timelines, and every timeline they meet, they fall in love, and then they die. The purpose of which there seems to be some higher power that is dictating this. We don't know that much about them in the first book. There is a follow-up book which I haven't read yet. I'm hoping to get it from the library soon, called The Last Beginning, which develops. I think there are a number of novellas as well which pick up different timelines for these 2 characters. In The Next Together there's a storyline set in, I think it's 17th century Carlisle, 18th century during the time of the Crimean War, early 21st century, so set around our time, and the sort of modern timeline in the book is about 20 years in the future from where we are now. Yeah, it's about how these 2 characters meet and interact in each timeline and try and figure out. The main part of the plot is about the present day Matthew and Catherine, the 2039 Matthew and Catherine, investigating what happened to their relatives in the 2019 timeline. It's told in mixed media format as well, so parts of it are told in reports and letters, emails, that sort of thing, but I thought it was really cleverly written, really well put together, and just cements Lauren James as one of my favourite authors and an author that I will keep coming back to. This was her debut as well, and for a debut it is so cleverly written and put together, constructed, that it's just really remarkable that that was her first book. Like, it's just amazing. So if you haven't read any Lauren James, really do go and check her out. She is very, very good. Anyway, that was quite a lot of books, which is why I'm going to be trying to cut these videos maybe in half and do maybe a mid-month wrap up, or sort of more of a recent reads thing, so I can talk about the books when they're a bit fresher in my mind and go into a bit more detail about them. If you haven't checked out my stats video yet, go and have a look at that, and you can see the breakdown of ratings a bit more clearly and my diversity tracking and all that sort of thing. Please let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them and what were some of your favourite things you read in February. You can also follow me on my social media, so that information will always be listed in the description box below for you. And please like this video if you liked it and think about subscribing if you haven't already. But I think that's everything for today, so thank you so much for watching and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!